the clothes were blown off them.
Again, thank you for being here.
Questions? Sir?
Why was she given penicillin initially? Did it not look initially like it was anthrax? And does that impact on any way on the current medication that she's taking, the Cipro?
I can't speak to that. Can you?
I think I can speak to that. In case the question wasn't heard in the back room, was why when she first noticed something wrong, why was she given antibiotics? Was that the question?
Penicillin as opposed to something else.
Penicillin. Well, here's the situation. Keep in mind that we did not know when this slight outbreak on her cheek appeared. We were not aware that there were anthrax concerns at another news organization, nor were we aware that the FBI had been alerted to those concerns.
This was around October 1st or so, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
We simply were not aware of it. I know that there were people at least one other place who were aware, but we were not aware of it. Over a weekend, she noticed this place on her cheek, and when the weekend ended, it was swelling ever so slightly, as she would put it. She came into work, and to tell you the truth, I didn't notice it. And she felt a little bit lethargic, and so she called her primary care physician. And the primary care physician said, well, you know, take penicillin. That was what would normally be prescribed, is my understanding under those circumstances. The important point here is anthrax was not on anybody's mind. It was not in the press. Now we're all very much aware of it. So she took the penicillin. When it didn't seem to respond to the first penicillin, another antibiotic, as my understanding, was prescribed. But at this point, anthrax is not on anybody's mind and not in the picture. So that's the reason it was prescribed in the beginning. Now, when the first case at another place became confirmed and came into the news, she and I spoke. She got in touch immediately with the CDC, with the city public health officials, and who asked her if she had symptoms. She did not. That is to say, you can say, well, was this a symptom? But there were other symptoms. Did she have a rash? No. Did she have the sniffles? No. Did she have a sore throat? No. Did she have any aches? She said, well, she had for one day. But their recommendation was that she be examined. She was examined by a private physician, but with a member of the CDC and the public health present. That was one person. It was a combination person. And they took blood test and a swab test. The swab test came back negative. The results of the blood test were not yet known. When the ABC second other news organization case happened, and when that happened, we talked, and it was decided to take a biopsy after the case at ABC had happened. I've left out one step. When the NBC case became public, when they and the city deemed it appropriate to make it public, her private physician, suggested at that point that it's because she began taking Cipro, and she began taking Cipro at that point. That was the same day the NBC announcement was made.
Yeah, one footnote here. Apparently, she first thought it was a bug bite to which she might be allergic, which is why antibiotics were indicated in the first place.
She'd had some concern before that things had happened with her complexion, and she thought it was a bug bite. And I will say that one way we got here this morning, once they took the biopsy, and you can understand it was sort of delicate because it was on her cheek, and nobody wants to leave a scar, but they took the biopsy. This was sent to the CDC, and the CDC reported back in the early hours of this morning that it had come back positive.
Have you been tested for exposure and if not you plan to be?
Let's take one question at a time in the back. Yes, sir?
Yes. Have you been tested for exposure? If you haven't, do you plan to be?
I have not been tested.
There are any plans to have you tested?
I have no plans to, but I'll be guided by what the health authorities think is responsible. I want to be responsible, but the answer is I've not been tested. I have no plans at this moment to be tested.
Do her daily responsibilities include opening mail for Dan Rather?
I beg pardon?
Do her daily responsibilities, part of her job, is it
That was
opening
part of her
mail for
job.
you?
It was not her only job, and there are other people in the office who shared that responsibility, but she had the primary responsibility of dealing with the mail.
So that'll obviously be one focus of the investigation. But again, I want to reiterate, we don't have any memory of a suspicious letter of any kind. She doesn't.
I have a question.
Well, now let's wait for a microphone because a lot of people are taking this as a broadcast.
But as you do that, we'll get to your question in a second, but let me just tack on to one thing because I think it's important. Forgive us if you must, but, you know, we're in the news business, and I'm trying to report this as straight up as I would any other story. And we know in news that assumption is the mother of a fouled-up story. We make no assumptions about how she contracted this. The police have indicated, at least a few days ago, well, you know, their assumption, they're working on the theory that it probably came through the mail, these cases in general. But I just underscoring with you, we have no idea how she contracted it. She has no memory whatsoever, and she's thought about it. We asked her to go back and think about it again. She has no memory of any mail, anything in the mail that raised any suspicion whatsoever. I think this gentleman here had the next question.
Oh, hold on 1 second, sir. I'm sorry. Just 10 seconds. Just bear with me. Thank you very much. And then you'll be next.
Do you
And then
have a
Kelly.
practice of setting aside mail that is considered suspicious so that it can be looked at by security? Is that something that routinely occurs?
I think you'll understand a reluctance here to go into the details of how we handle mail. But just simply let me say that we had for a very long time a procedure of handling the mail as safely as possible. I think it's clear that we reviewed those procedures and additional steps have been taken in the wake of this, and that's about as much as I would say.
Yeah, although, as you know, I think because we've been public about this, leaving aside what happens in Dan's office, obviously since the first Anthrax incident at NBC, the entire mail procedure for all of Viacom has been completely revised.
But I guess previously...
Well, we're not going to get into the
For
details
example,
of what
with
we've done
NBC,
previously.
they had a practice where if they got a suspicious letter, there was a file where they would maintain it,
Right.
and then they would turn it over to authorities at a certain point.
Right, we're not going to get any detail of what we did previously.
Thank you.
That gentleman back there. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Actually, two questions. First of all, is anyone else in the office taking antibiotics? And also, obviously, we're here in the building. Are any portions of the building closed right now?
Well, actually, the first. No one else in the office is taking antibiotics or has been taking them. Again, I want to underscore we will be guided by what medical authorities and the city health authorities and the CDC think is prudent now, but the answer to your question is no. And what was the second question?
I can answer that then. The second part of the question was, is any part of the building closed? And the answer to that is no as well. In fact, the health commissioner of the city told us this morning it is safe for us to continue working to the extent that investigators have to look at certain areas and possibly seal them off while they do epidemiological, hard word to say, tests. We will obviously be cooperative, but it's our intention to keep working, and nothing is closed right now.
Is that a little early on, if you don't know where the anthrax came from, to just open up the building to employees?
I'm sorry?
Obviously, you still don't know where the anthrax came from. There's absolutely no danger in the building at all at this point?
Our belief, certainly in consultation with health authorities, is that there is no danger to people continuing to work in the building. That's correct.
If that changes, then we'll assess and we'll adjust.
Yeah, I mean, our paramount concern is the safety of the employees, and we would never do anything to endanger them. We've been in consultation with the city and also with Dr. Ostroff, who I think will agree that it is safe for us to continue working here. Do you want to add anything to that, Dr. Ostroff? Just I think it might be good to hear from you on this subject. And you should turn so the cameras can see you, I think, if you don't mind. Stand up, if you don't mind standing up. Yeah. Okay, this is your moment in the sun.
Yeah.
Again, Dr. Stephen Ostroff of the CDC.
I've had many moments. It's on. I've had many moments in the sun this week. No, I would agree with that statement, and that's basically the statement that we gave this morning at the mayor's press conference as well, which is that, and I think it was stated very well by both Andy and Dan, which is that investigations need to be done to assure ourselves that the circumstances here are similar to the circumstances in the other two news organizations. By all appearances, the circumstances appear to be very similar. The time for, and again, I'm an epidemiologist, and so what I'm trained to do is look at patterns of disease. Certainly, the pattern here appears to be essentially identical to the pattern in the other two news organizations, and by all intents and purposes happened sometime in late September. There seems to be little question about that, based on our fundamental understanding of the epidemiology of cutaneous anthrax. The risk currently in this building is essentially negligible, and we feel quite comfortable that employees can continue to do the things that they need to do. It's very important to also point out that we will continue to perform epidemiologic investigations. We don't have all the information that we need. There also is a criminal investigation. I don't want to comment on that because I don't deal with the law enforcement side of things, but there are samples that need to be taken, and we will continue to evaluate the situation over time.
Thanks very much, Dr. Kelly.
Press briefing at CBS News, the essential news out of it. There was a fair amount of detail, but the essential news, one woman, an assistant to Dan Rather, who does deal with the mail at CBS, is being treated for anthrax, cutaneous anthrax through the skin. She's expected to recover. Building is still open, people are still working, and so far no other cases of exposure have shown up at CBS News, and in fact they don't precisely know how this one woman contracted it, though the epidemiologist from the CDC made it pretty clear in his mind the pattern, he said, is identical to the others. So that's the news out of CBS. We'll take a short break. On the other side of this break, Christiane Amanpour and Defense Secretary Don Rumsfeld will also update where all of these stories are, but a break first.
What kind of beer you got? A food?
Anything else?
Haydn's Cello Concerto in C major.
Which performance? Gorski, Yachting, or Chin?
How's that possible?
Our jukebox is every performance by every artist of every piece of music ever recorded.
This is the technology that makes it happen. This is Riding the Light. Quest.
When I start each morning. When my kids need a playmate.
Prozac Weekly is here. Ask your doctor if it's right for you. For a limited time, you can try Prozac Weekly for 1 month free. Visit freemonth.webmd.com to learn more and print out your coupon from Prozac Weekly. Talk to your doctor today to see if Prozac Weekly could be right for you. Prozac Weekly is here.
In this time of need, the American Red Cross is profoundly grateful for your generous outpouring of support. Thanks to your contributions,
Bush and indeed the British Prime Minister Tony Blair gave their strongest hints yet that a possible ground force is imminent. Are you saying that perhaps you can now envision a Northern Alliance offensive, and would the U.S. provide air support?
Well, I think that it's safe to say that the Northern Alliance, the various elements within the Northern Alliance are already attempting to take advantage of the situation and move their forces forward against the Taliban and against the Al-Qaeda forces in the north.
U.S. radio broadcasts are instructing Taliban troops how to surrender to U.S. troops. Does that mean there will be a U.S. force on the ground? And if not, to whom will Taliban forces surrender? Which U.S. troops?
Well, I would point out that in the north, the Northern Alliance forces, and in the south, various tribal elements have been contesting and competing against the Taliban for some time. The leaflets that are being distributed are encouraging Afghan people and Afghan forces to oppose the Taliban and to oppose the foreigners, the Al-Qaeda, who have come into their country and turned it into a haven for terrorist networks across the globe, and including those that killed thousands of people in Washington, D.C. and New York so recently. The hope is that those Taliban people will in fact move over and support the Northern Alliance and support the tribes in the south. It is also entirely possible, and indeed there has been some instances of this, where Taliban forces have changed sides, and that is something that is taking place today as we speak.
But Mr. Rumsfeld, the U.S. broadcast is the one that is being broadcast by this flying radio station, instructing specifically how to surrender to U.S. forces.
Well, I think the point of the broadcasts and of the leaflets that are being dropped is that we're encouraging people to surrender or to change sides, and it does not matter. The Afghan forces on the ground that are opposed to Taliban and opposed to Al-Qaeda are in many, many locations, and it's far more likely that they'll be working with those forces.
Officials in your own department have been telling reporters that there are now special operations forces and helicopters on the decks of the aircraft carriers that have been cleared of their fighter bombers. Can you confirm that to us?
Well, I'm sure there are helicopters and on various locations throughout the Central Command. I don't think that's really the point. If you're asking, am I going to discuss any conceivable future operations, needless to say, I must not do that. That would be putting people's lives at risk and compromising the confidentiality that's so necessary for operations.
U.S. intelligence has reportedly in the past detected testing of chemical weapons at bin Laden's camps in Afghanistan. Given that, and given what's going on in the United States, if there were to be an insertion of any U.S. personnel in Afghanistan, would they be provided, instructed to use chemical, biological protection uniforms and other such gear?
Well, we know certain things. We know that there are a list of countries that is public, nations that have been very active in sponsoring terrorism and fostering and facilitating and harboring terrorist networks. We also know that those same countries, for the most part, have been active in developing chemical and biologicals and weaponizing those capabilities. It seems to me it's not a great leap of imagination to suspect that, in fact, the relationship between those nations on the terrorist list and the terrorist networks will become sufficiently intimate at some point in the past or in the future that we can expect terrorist networks to be using chemical and biological weapons. And we also know that a number of them have been actively seeking radiation weapons. Now, if that's the case, one has to be cautious that these terrorist networks either have or will have, and therefore are likely to use, capabilities of that type, and see that forces, and as well as people in our country and deployed forces overseas, as well as friends and allies, do what they do with a sense of heightened awareness and preparedness.
Are you specifically concerned about that in Afghanistan if U.S. or other allied forces are inserted on the ground?
Well, I guess any time U.S. forces are in the air or on the ground or at sea against a enemy, and there's no question but that the terrorist networks are enemies, that one has to be worried about all kinds of threats that can come to them. And the threats are many and varied, and I don't know that I would necessarily elevate one or another higher than the ones you're suggesting.
Can I ask you about public opinion as this war continues? Despite a lot of rhetoric in this region, we have, from our own reporting, detected a discernible support in some quarters, even in Afghanistan, for the goal of the bombing campaign. Amongst Afghan exiles, amongst people in Afghanistan, those opposed to the Taliban. But recent reports and pictures of civilian casualties are beginning to shift that support. In order to reverse that trend, would you consider moving the targeting of leadership positions that you have been targeting from populated areas where inevitably there are likely to be civilian casualties? Would you consider shifting that targeting to, for instance, ground forces on the front lines away from populated areas?
Well, first, I think it's important to say that the targeting by the United States and by coalition forces has been very careful, it's been very measured, and it is for the most part not been in any populated areas. It has been, when you see reports on television or in the press that the bombings in Kabul or in Kandahar or some other location, for the most part, that means that it's on the outskirts in areas that are military targets or involve military individuals, clusters of forces. Now, that means that, in answer to your question, we really can't move it because we've already been focused totally on military targets and as I say, almost overwhelmingly outside of the city. To the extent that there have been significant military targets in areas that do have population nearby, they have almost always been targeted with a weapon that has a high degree of precision so that there will not be a high amount of collateral damage. And I think that the behavior of the Afghan people in the country, quite apart from what pictures might be shown, suggests that what I've just said is exactly true. We have a lot of reports from the ground to the effect that the innocent Afghan people are going about their affairs pretty much as normal, notwithstanding the bombing campaign, because they know it's focused on the people that in many instances the Afghan people would not want in their country anyway. There were foreign invaders and they're terrorists, and they're the Taliban that has harbored those terrorists. This effort is certainly not against the Afghan people. It's not against a race, it's not against a religion. It is against terrorists who came into the United States and killed thousands and thousands of human beings, innocent people.
Mr. Secretary, as I said, we did discern support for the goal of these airstrikes among some in Afghanistan and elsewhere. But I'm asking you, are you concerned that the civilian casualties, which you yourself have even spoken about in terms of some mistargeting, some mishits, we've seen, warehouses, we've seen certain civilian dwellings that you yourself have acknowledged. Are you concerned about a shift which we're hearing about in public support?
Well, we always have to be concerned, and you're quite right. There was an instance where a missile went amiss, and it hit a house, and 4 people, I understand, were killed, although we can't verify that. There was also another instance where a warehouse was hit, and a few people were injured. It is something that we care about. On the other hand, if you think of what the Taliban have done, they have not only killed several thousand of people in the United States and the Al-Qaeda, what they have done to the people of Afghanistan is a tragedy. The people are starving. They have killed any number of people. The weapons that are being fired today that you're talking about are coming, to be sure, in some instances from the sky. In other instances, they're coming from the Taliban shooting at the aircraft in the sky, and in still other instances, the weapons are being fired by opposition forces. So there are at least 3 different sources of weapons going on in that country, a country that has faced war against the Soviet Union and then a civil war for the years since. It is truly a tragedy, and our hope is that it can end soon and that the Afghan people can be cared for and assisted. It's not an accident that the United States of America gave something like $170 million for food assistance to Afghanistan well before September 11th. We do care about the people of that country.
You have said that many, many times, and indeed you've said over and over again, and so have all the leaders of this coalition, that this is not a war against Islam, but one against terrorism. But as you know, there are very loud voices in this region who are saying exactly the opposite, that this is, in fact, they claim a war against Islam. You and indeed Condoleezza Rice have just appeared on the Al Jazeera Arab satellite network. Are you concerned that you have been slow in getting your message out to the Muslim world?
Well, I think it's terribly important that we do it. I think it's important that we be effective and do it. I just just came back from a trip to several countries in the region, as you may recall, and met with the leadership there and went on television in each of those countries and discussed the purpose of this effort and the reasons for it. It is clearly important that the world understand what this is about. When a terrorist attack, they can attack any place at any time, and it's not possible to defend every place at every time. The weapons are very powerful today. The only choice that the United States has is to take this effort to the terrorists themselves and to find them and to root them out and to stop them from their murderous ways. This is all we are about. The United States has no interest in any piece of real estate anywhere outside of the United States of America. We don't covet other people's land. We have no axe to grind with any people on the world except for people who are going about the world killing innocent people.
I want to try to get to the heart of the perception problem, Mr. Secretary. You have, as you say, gone out of your way to express public empathy with the Afghan people as opposed to the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. But in this part of the world, people, Muslims, feel that the United States has not shown similar empathy for the poverty and the misery of the Palestinian cause. In this part of the world, that is a litmus test. And they make a link between the Palestinian cause and the perceived lack of empathy and the claim that Osama bin Laden makes to represent their cause. Now, I know you do not think, and nor does most people think, that link is justified. But do you accept that America has a long-term problem with this kind of perception in the Muslim world unless that issue is dealt with and resolved?
Well, first, you're quite right. There's no question but that Osama bin Laden and others are actively trying to go around the world and connect these things. And I must say, with some success in the case of the Al-Qaeda. I would also point out, however, that it was the United States and a coalition of Western countries that went in and threw the Saddam Hussein and the Iraqis out of a Muslim country, Kuwait. It was the United States that worked with the Muslims in Kosovo and Bosnia when they were being badly treated. It was the United States that assisted with food aid and humanitarian assistance in Somalia, another Muslim nation. The United States, the biggest food provider in Afghanistan before these terrible attacks on the United States. The United States is deeply involved in the peace process in the Middle East. You use the word until it is solved. It has been there a long time, all of my adult life, more than your adult life. It has been going on for decade after decade after decade. It is a terribly difficult, intractable problem. President Bush and his predecessors, dating all the way back, have all been involved in that peace process. I've been involved in it in 3 administrations. It is not something that lends itself to instantaneous solution. And I think that the people of the region have to know that President Bush and Secretary Powell and George Tenet, any number of other people are on the phone, are meeting in person with the leaders on both sides in the Middle East peace process, working diligently to try to help solve those problems. The violence seems to continue. It ebbs and it flows. It gets a little better and a little worse. It is a tragedy. People have been killed within the last week. It's something that the entire world has to be concerned about. But I think that suggesting that the United States of America should be attacked by terrorist networks and thousands of Americans killed, innocent people, men, women, and children, by people who are proud of having done it and go on television about how much they agree with the fact that it was done, and then to suggest that we must not do anything about that until a very intractable problem between the two sides in the Middle East is solved, suggests that it might be another decade. That problem is being worked hard by the President. We understand its importance. And we also understand that there are people out there making mischief. They're trying to stir up that pot and to make it more difficult and to contend that the United States, for whatever reason, is inattentive. We are not inattentive. We are doing, as are other countries, everything humanly possible to help solve that problem in a way that makes sense for the parties to the process. They have to live together ultimately in that region. And that means that in the last analysis, they're going to have to find ways to sort out those difficulties, and the United States stands ready, as do other countries in the region, to be as helpful as humanly possible.
Mr. Secretary,